Diolch yn fawr, pnawn da, good afternoon. Well, I can't claim credit for being personally responsible for that unlearning process, but I think Soil Association has probably had a hand in that. So my name's Andrew Tuddenham. I'm the Head of Policy Wales with Soil Association, working as Soil Association Cymru. So if I just go through. So look, this morning I think it's been really interesting conversations, and it's interesting how, without exception, they've all moved very quickly from the specialist topic into the big system change that's needed. And that's really the space that the Soil Association works in. We're a charity. We were set up 70 odd years ago by a very pioneering and interesting individual, Lady Eve Balfour, who basically was seeing in the 20th century the development of the chemical era of farming and how farming was intensifying through all of the new ways of adding fertility through artificial fertilizers, all of the corrective chemicals used to then offset diseases and pests. And although she couldn't claim credit for being the originator of the organic farming approach, she brought it to the next level within Britain. Identified that there was a need, and a real need, to focus in on the soil and to look at the connections and those huge number of connections within the soil biology and how that interacts with plants, with animal health, with human health, and with gut biome as well. So the Soil Association was born out of that vision, formed in 1946. She also founded some of the principles of organic farming. So organic farming, I think, as we're probably all aware, is the legally recognised standard for farming without artificial fertiliser, farming without herbicides, a whole raft of other measures, really in essence to get back to a form of agriculture that Lady Eve Balfour would have seen at the start of the 20th century, and many would have seen at that time, which relied on soil biology, essentially, to provide a healthy crop and a healthy animal. So the principles that she introduced, which have been adopted around the world for organic farming, are that it's based on four things. The first is health, the health of the soil, the health of animals and plants and all of the interdependencies. The second is ecology, so that's using, essentially emulating natural systems and bringing that into farming. And natural systems tend to be very diverse, and they tend to be circular in terms of how they circulate energy and nutrients within a defined unit. And we heard a bit about that this morning in terms of thinking about where all that phosphate is coming into the system from overseas. In some cases, in the case of IPUs, it's coming from the tropics in the form of the soya feed that's being produced there. So these are massively extended systems that aren't closed and local. The third element that Lady Eve Balfour introduced into the organic movement was the principle of fairness. And that's recognising that we all have a common environment and there should be common opportunities for all. And the fourth principle is of care. Care for the environment, and that is then translated into the organic standards in terms of there being a precautionary approach, very much an avoidance of using things which could damage all of those natural environment features. So that's some of our background. We're probably better known for the little logo in the bottom right corner. So her lasting legacy was the formulation, the introduction of organic standards as a piece of legislation in the early 90s, which recognised if you want to farm organically and sell your produce organically, it has to comply with legally recognised standards. And so Soil Association certification is one of the main control bodies which provides inspections. It's a subsidiary of the charity. But broadly, what we're doing within this whole little ecosystem of initiatives and other organisations that we've set up is that we're sharing knowledge. You can see that with some of the work we're doing with innovative farmers, working farmer to farmer and with research institutes attached to trial new methods. We're also just launched Soil Association Exchange, which is an entity that's now providing a benchmarking service to farmers so that they can actually look across all of their environmental and social and animal health and welfare indicators, bring out the data from their farms, measure everything, and the supply chain, and this is relevant to today's discussion, the supply chain is demanding that. Increasingly, the supply chain needs to have the evidence that it will then use to sell its products or demonstrate its journey to net zero. So Soil Association Exchange is one way of doing that. It's interestingly got the backing of agricultural lenders as well. So Lloyds Bank are putting a lot of their farmers through that programme. So that shows how the world is starting to change, in that farmers who require mortgages for new investments are being put through this programme so that they can then, in effect, the lender gets a bit of sort of due diligence on how the farm is being run, and is the farm being positioned well to trade in this changing marketplace. So we share knowledge, we're working with others, working in partnership with Sustainable Food Places, which is bringing sustainably produced food into more everyday settings. And we set the standards, so Soil Association certification for one, Soil Association Exchange to some extent, but also Food for Life, which is in there, which is setting standards for public sector food, and providing advice and support. Now this probably feels like a big sales pitch, but this is actually relevant because each of our speakers this morning, in talking about their subject, has then moved on to, well, how do we change the system? And the reason why the Soil Association is working across the piece here, it's not just on sustainable farming, it's on sustainable food, is that we're trying to find those tools and those techniques that can help change the system, that can help link everything up, so that we do have, fundamentally, a transition in farming and land use, so that we've got more nature-friendly farming, what could be called agroecological forms of farming, which include organic, but also includes other non-certified methods, and a transition to healthy and sustainable diets. And essentially that means less and better meat production and more and better fruit and veg production. So that's a bit of a sort of ramble around as to how we're working and what our interests are. I've avoided talking about soils, but I am here for that, so I suppose I should earn my ticket. And I suppose it's worth just sort of thinking, well, how have we got to this point where the rivers are collapsing, where farmers aren't deriving a meaningful livelihood? And it is the food system. We've got a food system which is encouraging farmers, pushing farmers to specialise. In the east, it's obviously into grain production. In the west, in Wales in particular, it's red meat production. Along that way, that specialisation has been fuelled by chemical inputs. That the damage to the soil is now becoming apparent in terms of, for example, how artificial nitrogen changes the soil biology, changes the microbial composition of the soil, and in effect it sets the path for the plants to become more dependent on artificial nitrogen than the nitrogen that would have been supplied through the processes that the soil biology are running. So there's a sort of a dependency and addiction to it. And on the way, the soil is becoming more acid. The chemistry is changing. And acid soils release less fertility to plants. So we've got a real bind that's taking hold in that as more fertiliser is applied, nitrogen fertiliser in particular, the soils are less fertile and more dependent on that nitrogen input. I'll wrap up soon. So really I wanted to focus on that bit as an example of how the system we have is locking some farms in. And the other way that they are being locked in is through the need to grow and intensify. I live in West Wales, I'm surrounded by the dairy sector, I've seen how it's intensified, fewer dairy farms, just as many dairy animals, bigger farms. All of that requires huge investment in the infrastructure, and that is difficult to reverse out of because you've got debts, you've got massive finance to pay off. So when we're thinking about rivers, we do need to think about how this transition for farmers can actually be viable. So I'll stop there. Diolch.